Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Core Studio. Welcome to the show. Not too long ago, my episode on the Golden Pig of Modern Horizons 2 came out, and in that episode, I talked about my picks for my favorite commanders in the set. So in my opinion, those commanders are the best commanders in this set because they are the best designed, not necessarily the most powerful. And on an even more recent episode, I talked about my picks for the Golden Toilet of Modern Horizons 2, which is essentially the exact, well, opposite. These were my picks for the worst commanders from the set, and again, that's not worst in terms of power level, but worst in terms of design, and again, this is all just my opinion. But if you're here right now to hear even more of my opinion, and you want to know my picks for the most powerful commanders in Modern Horizons 2, well, then you clicked on the right episode, because you're here for that. There are 17 brand new commanders in Modern Horizons 2, and I'm going to be ranking each of them in one of the 5 tiers. We're going to start off with the worst tier, which is the D tier, then move up to C, then B, then A, and finally get to the top tier at S. But before we jump into that, a quick disclaimer before we get started. The power level tier that each of these commanders is placed in is 100% based off of my own opinions. So your opinion on certain commanders' power levels might differ, and that's okay. And because these rankings are based off of my own opinions and I'm a casual player, a CEDH list might be very different. If there's some sort of a 2-card combo or a commander works really well with something that's not used in casual like mass land destruction, well then it might not make it to the top when it would have in a different list. Also, these rankings are made completely within the vacuum of Modern Horizons 2, meaning that an S from this set might not be an S compared to something in, say, Strixhaven. So essentially these power rankings are the commanders in comparison to each other. And one last thing before we jump into this, a huge thank you to Eddie for the great discussions around these cards. So as always, if I make any mistakes in this episode or any other episode, make sure you blame Eddie because it's always Eddie's fault. Just kidding, but seriously, anyways, let's jump into it. So let's start with the weakest commanders from this set with the D tier. And just a quick note that the commanders in each of these tiers are not in any particular order, so just because I bring up one first doesn't mean it's more powerful than the next one or less powerful or whatnot. Regardless, the first commander that I want to bring up is Torok Dread Cantor. And I'm not sure exactly why I said the name like that because, yeah, it's not really that imposing of a commander, obviously because it finished in the D tier. Anyways, Torok Dread Cantor is a 2/1 human cleric for 1 and a black with kicker for black. He has protection from white, and whenever an opponent discards a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Torok Dread Cantor. Whenever it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target opponent discards 2 cards at random. So this is an incredibly underwhelming discard commander. Essentially, if you kick Torok, you get a Hymn to Torok, which, yes, that's flavorful. But the payoff is hot garbage. Torok gets slightly larger. And yeah, if you're playing against a mono-white deck, sure, your opponent might be in some trouble because Torok has protection from white. So yeah, you can make your opponents discard cards and grow your Torok, and then yeah, you can swing at that mono-white player and they can't block you. Unless they've got an artifact creature. Then they could anyways. Regardless, yeah, this is a very underwhelming commander. If it had a better payoff, it could definitely be bumped up, but just growing with +1/+1 counters isn't gonna be enough. So yeah, Torok, you have definitely earned your place in the D tier. Maybe go sing a hymn or something to feel better. I don't know what you do. Anyways, speaking of +1/+1 counters, let's talk about Captain Ripley Vance, who's also finishing in the D tier. The Captain is a 3/2 human pirate for 2 and a red, and it has whenever you cast your 3rd spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Captain Ripley Vance that deals damage equal to its power to any target. Okay, so let's break this card down into requirement and payoff and see how hard that requirement is to meet and how big that payoff is. The requirement of casting 3 spells in a turn is not really all that easy of a feat to meet a lot of the time. Even if you can do it, you're going to have to utilize a lot of resources to do so. So when you do that, you're rewarded with 1 +1/+1 counter, and then you can ping something. Yeah, you're going to need to do a lot of work to make this commander work. You're going to need some damage doublers, other ways to pump this commander, maybe a way to give it infect, etc, etc. All the while also having a bunch of low-to-the-ground cards that you can cast that may be cantrips, so that you can cast and actually get that third spell trigger. So, oh Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. You know, if the prize that you were seeking was being put in the D tier of Modern Horizons 2. So there you go, you won that there. But now let's wrap up the D tier with the final commander of it, and it's a bit of a doozy of a name, so here we go. As Moran Namar Ikad Istina Koldikar. It never gets easier. Even when you've said this, I don't know how many times I've tried to say it, like 40 or so, it never gets easier. And speaking of something not being easy, let's talk about this commander and what it does. And just for everyone's sake, I'm just going to refer to this commander as A instead of its really long name. A is a 3/3 human wizard with absolutely no mana cost because the mana cost could not fit on the card, and because there's another way to cast it. Anyways, A has, as long as you've discarded a spell this turn, you may pay Rakdos to cast this spell. Whenever A enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a card named the Underworld Cookbook, reveal it, put in your hand, then shuffle. And by sacrificing 2 foods, target creature deals 6 damage to itself. So first off, you can't even cast this commander unless you've discarded a card. Which, yes, you can cast for cheap if you have, but again, you could be stuck where you can't actually even do that if you don't have a discard card. Then once you jump through that hoop, you do get to go tutor for a card called the Underworld Cookbook, which you can put in your hand, then you can cast for very cheap. It only costs 1 mana. The Underworld Cookbook has tap, discard a card, create a food token. And that is one of the very few ways in Rakdos to actually make food. And it takes 2 foods to actually even utilize A. And the payoff is having 1 creature deal 6 damage to itself for 2 foods. So again, it's tough to get this commander out in the first place, and you can get stuck where you can't actually even get it out. Secondly, food is an extremely rare resource in Rakdos. So food tokens are going to be scarce when utilizing this commander, and it costs a lot of food to even get any value out of it. If there was more food support in these colors, yes, this could be better, but there's definitely not. Especially if your cookbook gets dealt with, your deck is pretty much done. Okay, one more time, here we go. As Moran Namardikad Istina Koldikar. Close enough, okay? You have earned your spot in the D tier. And I truly hope that this is the last time that I have to try to pronounce this name. But now it's time for us to move up a tier into the C tier. While these commanders are more powerful than those in the D tier, they're still not even halfway to the top. So to start off the C tier, let's talk about a commander that I like to call Smalta with Thrasta Tempest Roar. Smalta is a 7/7 dinosaur with trample and haste that costs 10 green. It has the spell cost 3 less to cast for each other spell cast this turn, and it's got trample over planeswalkers, which means that this creature can deal excess combat damage to the controller of the planeswalker it's attacking. So it essentially just runs over a planeswalker and hits that player as well. And then Thrasta Tempest Roar has hexproof as long as it enters the battlefield this turn. So I call Thrasta Smalta because it's kind of like a smaller version of Galta. But unlike Galta, I think this commander is pretty weak. Now, it's not D tier weak, but it definitely belongs in the C tier in my opinion. Again, like Captain Ripley Vance, you've got to cast a lot of cards to get use out of this. You've got to dedicate a lot of resources, say by casting 3 cards to reduce this cost so that you can actually cast it. And then when you do that, the payoff is, let's just say, okay. In a lot of formats, yeah, a 7/7 trample, haste, trample over planeswalkers, temporary hexproof can be very impactful. But in Commander, there are many more exciting and powerful things. So again, you've got to invest a lot of resources, and there aren't a lot of low-to-the-ground cantrips in green to replace themselves, and the payoff isn't all that great. So Smalta, you have most definitely earned your place in the C tier. You're not only a less powerful Galta, but you're also a less powerful commander than many others in this set. Speaking of which, let's talk about yet another mono-green commander with a Progenitor Ooze. Ave is a 2/2 Ooze that costs 2 green. It has Storm, and a Progenitor Ooze isn't legendary if it's a token. Ave enters the battlefield with a ++1 counter on it for each other Ooze you control. Like I just mentioned with Smalta, green is not good at just casting a ton of cards in a singular turn. I mean, can green decks do that? Sure, but then you're overcommitting and you're utilizing a lot of your cards for essentially 1 turn, and if that doesn't work out, then you lose. Like I said about Smalta, there aren't a lot of low-to-the-ground cantrips in green. So if you're casting just a bunch of low-to-the-ground cards to get your storm count up, well, they're not replacing themselves and your hand's going to be empty really quick. And again, your payoff for just investing all those cards into this is very lackluster. Cool, I get a couple of copies of this that are slightly larger. And yes, you can do Ooze Tribal, but there really aren't that many mono green good oozes. So again, like Smalta, a huge investment for not that big of a payoff. And as I've mentioned before in this card, this is the very first commander that we've ever seen with Storm, and I was very disappointed. Yes, Storm is an incredibly powerful mechanic, and you've got to be careful when doing something with it. But this is probably the safest and also most bland approach that I could possibly think about. But again, Ave, just because you're bland doesn't mean that you're not powerful, but in this case, you're not. So you're in the C tier. So you and Smalta can go complain together that there aren't more mono green cantrips. Finally, let's talk about the last commander in the C tier with Zabaz the Glimmerwasp. Zabaz is a 0/0 insect with modular 1 that costs 1. It has if a modular triggered ability would put 1 or more ++1 counters on a creature you control, that many +1/+1 counters are put on it instead. By paying a red, you destroy target artifact you control, and by paying a white, Zabaz the Glimmerwasp gains flying until end of turn. So, like I mentioned earlier with Rakdos Food, modular Boros, or actually modular just in general, really isn't all that supported of a mechanic. If there were more modular cards out there, yeah, this could probably be better, but there really aren't. I mean, I believe there were less than 10 creatures with modular in Modern Horizons 2, and that nearly doubled the total number of modular creatures in Magic. So yeah, not a whole lot of support there. Regardless, if I was to build around this commander, I probably would just completely ignore that modular piece. There are artifacts out there like Ugin's Nexus that actually want to be destroyed, so yeah, you can use Zabaz to actually just do that for you. And by being able to just pay a white to give this flying, it essentially becomes Hope of Gearpore. So like Hope of Gearpore, this could be a low-to-the-ground Voltron kind of commander. And it's probably even more powerful than Hope of Gearpore because you've got access to both red and white instead of, just colorless cards. But in terms of its power level compared to the other commanders in Modern Horizons 2, in my opinion, it is most definitely in the C tier. Because you've got a better option and a way to build it, it's not in the worst, but it's definitely not even in the middle of the road when it comes to commanders of this set. But next up, it's time for us to move on to the B tier. These are your middle-of-the-road commanders. They're not the weakest, but they're also not the strongest commanders in the set. So to start with the B tier, let's talk about Svalin of Sea and Sky. Svalin is a 3/4 merfolk god that costs 1 blue. It has indestructible as long as you control at least 2 other merfolk, and whenever it attacks you, draw a card, and on top of that, other merfolk you control have Ward 1. Ward 1 essentially means that whenever another merfolk you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter it unless that player pays 1. So it's kind of like a lesser hexproof, but as a tax. So that's just a solid overall commander for a merfolk tribal deck. If you get more merfolk in play, this is harder to deal with. And when she's in play, she also protects your other merfolk. And when she's protected with that indestructibility, well, she's essentially a free draw engine for you. Again, she's most definitely not doing anything game breaking, but she can be a very solid commander for a merfolk tribal deck. So Svalin of Sea and Sky, although you are a god in the Magic universe, you are not a god in these tier rankings because you are at the C tier. But still, you are a very solid commander. And speaking of solid, let's talk about General Ferris Rockerick, who I like to call Ferris Bueller. And yes, I know Ferris is spelled differently, but come on, it's Ferris Bueller, okay? Anyways, Ferris Bueller is a 3/1 human soldier with hexproof from monocolored, and it costs 1 red-white. Ferris has, whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a 4/4 red and white golem artifact creature token. So this commander does have some protection with that hexproof from monocolored, which is nice. Your opponent can't Path to Exile it, or Swords to Plowshares, or even Beast Within. And it can provide you a ton of value throughout the game for whenever you cast your multicolored spells. If you cast a 1-mana Boros spell, congratulations, with that you're also getting a 4/4. Now there are only so many effective 1-mana spells that are Boros, but there are plenty at 2 and even more at 3, so yeah, you've got a lot of options. And you also have a lot of options when it comes to ways to pump your entire army, so yeah, go make your golem army, swing away, and do a lot of damage. And actually, it's kind of fitting that Ferris Bueller ended up in the B tier, like B for Bueller. Bueller. Okay, I'm done with that. Let's move on. And we're moving on to Lannis Cryptozoologist, or as I like to call it, Lannis Cryptocluologist. Lannis is a 1/2 Snake Elf Scout because, yeah, that's a creature type, which actually, no, that's not even that surprising these days. There's so many new ones. Anyways, that costs green-blue. Lannis has, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. And by tapping and sacrificing X clues, target opponent reveals the top X card to their library. You may put a non-land permanent card with mana value X or less among them onto the battlefield under your control. That player puts the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. So, in Simic, clues do have a decent amount of support, but regardless, Lannis provides you an absurd amount of support with that first trigger. So, in Simic, you can cast creatures, of course. You can also just, cast and bounce creatures back to your hand, and then you can cast them again, or you can blink creatures, etc., etc., etc. You can make a lot of clues with this. And then you can utilize those clues to, at instant speed, sacrifice a bunch of them and get something powerful off the top of an opponent's library. But again, how powerful of a thing that you get is limited to, what's in your opponent's libraries. If you're playing against a bunch of spell-slinging decks, this is not going to be all that great. But if you're playing against someone that's got a lot of powerful creatures or other non-land permanents, you can really make a big impact with this. So because you are heavily dependent on your opponent's cards, Lannis, you fit right into the B tier. And now I just realized that I really should have made some sort of a clue pun in this one, but you're probably getting tired of those anyways, so let's move on. To the Monkey Pirate, yes, you heard me right, Monkey Pirate, Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. Ragavan is a 2/1 Monkey Pirate. I'm just going to keep saying that because it's fun to say. Anyways, that costs a red. Whenever Ragavan deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token and exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card, and it's got dash for 1 in a red. So Ragavan is in the very exclusive club of commanders that are 1 mana or less. Even though I just talked about Zabaz in the last tier, there really aren't too many of them. Regardless, this is a commander that you are pretty much guaranteed to get down on turn 1, and you're essentially guaranteed to get temporary ramp and temporary card advantage with it. So you play it, and for a few turns, because again, most of your opponents probably aren't going to get a blocker out, you're going to be able to get extra treasure and extra cards off the top of your opponent's libraries. And that temporary ramp can get you really far ahead of your opponents, especially if you hit a mana rock or something off the top of their library to help you out even further. I mean, just think about the scenario where, turn 2, swing with this, hit an opponent, get the Soul Ring off the top of their library, and you can just use that treasure that you just got to cast it. So this can help you start off with some really explosive turns. With all that said, though, you are limited to mono red, and you're probably going to need some other ways to, finish your opponents off instead of just keep hitting them with this monkey. Though Voltron is a viable way to go with this if you really want to. So because you can get Ragavan down early and it generates you temporary ramp and temporary card advantage right away, it finds its spot in the B tier. Monkey Pirate. I just want to say that one more time. Next up, let's talk about Gris the Hunger Tide. Gris is a planeswalker that starts off at 3 starting loyalty and it costs 1 black-green. Now, although it doesn't say it can be your commander, trust me, it has been confirmed that it can be, or it wouldn't be in this list. Regardless, what it does say is as long as it isn't on the battlefield, it's a 1/1 insect creature and issues other types. Now, technically, that doesn't work with the current rules of how this would work and being able to build around your commander, but they're making some adjustments so that the rules work with it, so it can be, okay? Regardless, its +1 is create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token, then mill a card. If an insect card was milled this way, put a loyalty counter on Gris and repeat this process. Its -2 is you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, destroy a target creature or planeswalker. And its -5 is each opponent loses life, go to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So by plussing and hitting a bunch of insects off the top, you're making a bunch of insects, getting a lot into your graveyard, and also getting a lot of loyalty counters on this. In a Golgari deck, you've got a lot of ways to interact with your graveyard, and you've even got ways to get your creatures out of your graveyard and back on top of your library to do this all over again. So you can flood the board and your graveyard with a deck like this, and then you can just make your opponents lose a ton of life. Now, being an insect tribal does somewhat limit you in power level, as there are only so many effective insects. But still, with the right build, this commander can be impactful, and that's what puts it at the B tier. If there were bees instead of insects, it would have been a lot more flavorful. Anyways, moving on to the last commander in this tier with Garth One-Eye, or as I like to call him, Garth Algar, so I can say party on Garth. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's a Wayne's World reference. Okay, let's keep going. Anyways, Garth is a 5/5 human wizard that costs Wooburg, so white, blue, black, red, green. And he's only got one ability, but it's a really long ability, so here we go. Tap, choose a card name that hasn't been chosen from among Disenchant, Brain Geyser, Terror, Shivan Dragon, Regrowth, and Black Lotus. Create a copy of the card with the chosen name. You may cast the copy, you still pay its cost. So Garth gives you access to a suite of cards from Alpha, which is pretty sweet. So Garth is very much a toolbox commander. Disenchant can destroy an artifact or enchantment, Brain Geyser can draw target player X cards, Terror can get rid of a creature, Shivan Dragon is, well, a dragon, Regrowth can get you a card back, and Black Lotus is, well, Black Lotus. You know, that incredibly expensive card that is more expensive than houses, and it's banned in every format, including Commander, but again with Garth, you can play it. Now, even though Garth is giving you access to this incredibly broken card, it's actually still a very fair commander, simply because of the words, hasn't been chosen. Basically, with this suite of cards, you get access to each of them once. If you tap Garth and cast Black Lotus, well, you can't do it again. Or at least I should say you can't do that again without recasting him or blinking him, etc., etc. There are workarounds, yes, but you need to have workarounds to actually do that. And of course, there are ways to combo with this and go infinite, but for the most part, this is a very fair toolbox commander. So out of all the commanders in the B tier, Garth was probably the closest to getting bumped up to the A tier, but he just didn't make it quite there. Regardless, one more time I've gotta say, party on Garth. But now it's time for us to move on to the A tier. These are some of the most powerful commanders from Modern Horizons 2, though they're not in the top tier, they are really powerful still. And the first of these that I want to bring up is Karth the Lion. Karth is a 3/5 human warrior that costs 2 black-green. Whenever Karth the Lion enters the battlefield or a planeswalker you control dies, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal a planeswalker card from among them and put it in your hand, put the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. And planeswalker's loyalty abilities you activate cost initial +1 to activate. So Karth is a fantastic Super Friends commander. First off, in that type of a deck, Karth is pretty much guaranteed card advantage on ETB. On top of that, whenever your planeswalkers die, you essentially get to replace them with one off the top of your library. But what's even more impactful is that last part, which I had to reread a couple of times to make sure I completely understood it. Planeswalkers' loyalty abilities you activate cost initial +1 to activate. Essentially what this means is that if it's a +1, it becomes essentially a +2. And if it's something like an ultimate that's a -7, well now it's just a -6. So Karth can essentially supercharge your planeswalkers and get them to ultimate a lot quicker, sometimes immediately. So this commander helps you get planeswalkers off the top of your library whenever it comes into play or when any of your planeswalkers die, and then it also helps them ultimate in absolutely no time. So yeah, that's a very powerful commander. Now if Karth was say 5 color, it might take over as the #1 Super Friends commander and might even make it up into the S tier, but alas, Karth is just Golgari, which is still a good combination for planeswalkers, but again, 5 color would give you access to, well, all of them. So Karth has definitely earned his spot in the A tier. Next up, let's move on to the brand new Mardu Elder Dragon. It's a 7/7 Elder Dragon with flying and lifelink that costs 2 red, red, white, white, black, black. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you pay red, white, black. And when it dies, it deals 7 damage to each non-legendary creature. Now, this one was definitely on the fence for me between the B tier and the A tier, but I ended up bumping it up. Yes, this commander does cost quite a bit to get out at 8 mana. That being said, when you do get it out, it can have a huge impact on the game and can really set you up to win. Whether you have a way to sacrifice it or you just wait for the upkeep trigger, when it dies, it's going to demolish pretty much all of your opponent's boards. If you built your deck with a lot of other powerful legendary creatures, your board's going to remain untouched. On top of that, because this commander has lifelink, for every single non-legendary creature that got pinged for 7, you're gaining 7 life. So this is essentially a one-sided board wipe in your command zone that gains you an absurd amount of life when it dies. And of course, there are ways in these colors to take even more advantage of this commander. You can make a temporary copy of it, which dies, and then you get that trigger. Or you can have it come right back into play when it dies. There are plenty of ways to really use and abuse that death trigger to really just wipe out your opponent's boards, gain a ton of life, and control the game. So in my opinion, even with that absurd mana cost, this commander definitely deserved to be in the A tier. The impact that can have on the game is just undeniable. Next up, let's move on to Yusri, Fortune's Flame. Yusri is a 2/3 Ifrit with flying that costs 1 blue-red. It has whenever it attacks, choose a number between 1 and 5. Flip that many coins. For each flip you win, draw a card. For each flip you lose, Yusri deals 2 damage to you. If you won 5 flips this way, you may cast spells from your hand this turn without paying their mana cost. So this commander has absurd upside, essentially drawing you 5 cards and giving you omniscience for the turn. That being said, it also has a huge downside, being it pings you for 10 damage. Now, most of the time, it's going to finish somewhere in between where you draw some cards and you take some damage. Regardless, there are ways to completely mitigate that downside. For example, if you give it lifelink, it's not actually going to be doing you any harm. On top of that, a card like Krark's Thumb makes your coin flips much more likely to win. So again, with this commander, you can completely mitigate the downside of it and actually make the upside much more likely. But even just think about it this way. This is a 3 mana commander that has the potential to draw you up to 5 cards on the next turn it attacks. Now, most of the time that's going to be 2 or 3 cards, but still, that is a crazy amount of card advantage throughout the game. Especially considering in Izzet, you've got access to extra turn spells and extra combat spells, and yeah, things can get out of control really quickly with this. And that's not talking about all the other coin flip cards out there that benefit from all the coins you're going to be flipping with this. So yeah, Yusri is a commander with a lot of potential, and I think it definitely earned its spot in the A tier. And if you just absolutely love flipping coins, you should probably be considering this one. Regardless, now let's move on to the final commander from the A tier with Chatterfang Squirrel General. Chatterfang is a 3/3 Squirrel Warrior with Forest Walk that costs 2 and a green. It has if one of our tokens be created under your control, those tokens plus that many 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens are created instead. And by paying a black, you can sacrifice X squirrels and target creature gets +X, -X until end of turn. Now, squirrels are a tribe that really don't have all that much support, but Chatterfang makes up for that and then some. Because with Chatterfang, you just basically have to make a lot of tokens of whatever else, and then Chatterfang just also gives you that many squirrels. So whether you're making sapling tokens, or plant tokens, or even treasure or food tokens, well, you're getting squirrels with them. So you can flood the board in absolutely no time with this commander. And then you can control the board with that last ability by paying a black to sacrifice some squirrels just to take out whatever creatures you need to. So good luck to your opponents keeping any of their key creatures on the board when this is in play and you've got an army of squirrels. And a simple spell can double and then basically triple your army thanks to Chatterfang, and then you just rebuilt your board and your opponents are in big trouble again. So yeah, Chatterfang is incredibly powerful and definitely deserved its spot in the A tier. But there's still one last tier for us to tackle. So now it's time for us to move on to the final tier, the most powerful tier, with the most powerful commander, and yes, I said commander as in singular, with the S tier. And the only commander to deserve this ranking and distinction is Sithis Harvest Hand. Sithis is a 1/2 legendary enchantment creature nymph that costs green-white. She's a very simple commander that just says, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Although she doesn't have much text, don't let that fool you, this is an incredibly powerful commander. Enchantments are probably the most difficult permanents to deal with in Magic, and this is an enchantress that you can get down on turn 2 consistently. So you get this enchantress down, and then you get other benefits down like other enchantresses, and then you just keep casting more and more enchantments, refilling your hand, and getting a lot of other cool effects. So yeah, there are plenty of enchantments out there that are incredibly impactful and very powerful that help you control the board and win the game. And again, as just a nice little benefit, on top of being, just a fantastic card advantage engine, you also just gain some life whenever you're casting those enchantments as well. So pad your life total, draw an absurd amount of cards, and take over the game with all of your enchantments. And again, there are some absurdly powerful enchantments out there. There are enchantments that draw you even more cards. There are enchantments that protect you. There are enchantments that even protect each other. So yeah, this commander in this type of deck can be incredibly difficult to deal with. Once it gets going, and believe me, it's going to get going early, it's going to be really hard to stop. So in my opinion, again, Sithis, you have most definitely earned your spot alone in the S tier. Out of all the commanders from Modern Horizons 2, you stand above all of them. But again, these rankings are all just my opinion. So now I would love to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what you think the most powerful commanders from this set are. And of course, as always, thanks again and have a good one.